I thought the crash was the worst thing that would happen to me that day. I was wrong. Lying in the trauma unit, unable to lift my arms. I begged my parents to take my newborn for just 48 hours. My mother's voice was chillingly polite when she told me no. She called it setting a boundary. She had no idea she had just handed my grandfather the weapon he needed to destroy everything they had built. The automatic doors of Lakeview Women's Hospital slid open, and the humid air of Cedar Hollow hit me like a physical weight. It smelled of wet asphalt and impending rain, a sharp, earthy contrast to the sterile, recirculated oxygen I had been breathing for the last 48 hours. I sat in the wheelchair, clutching the handle of the infant car seat with a grip so tight my knuckles had turned the color of old parchment. Inside that plastic shell slept Leo, my son. He was barely 2 days old, a tiny bundled mystery wrapped in a white blanket with gray elephants on it. The nurse behind me, a kind woman named Sarah, who had spent the last 2 shifts helping me figure out how to latch a breastfeeding baby without crying from the pain, patted my shoulder. "You are going to be just fine." "Victoria," she said, "do you want me to wait until your ride pulls up?" I hesitated. The curb was bustling with other families. A father was wrestling a massive bouquet of balloons into a sedan. A grandmother was weeping joyfully into a cell phone. It all felt performative and loud, and I just wanted to be inside the quiet safety of my own car. "I am okay," I said, forcing a smile that felt tight on my face. "My car is just in the short-term lot right there. I can make it." Sarah hesitated, checking my chart one last time with her eyes. "The policy says I wheel you to the curb. Once you stand up, you are officially discharged. Take it slow." I stood up. My body felt foreign, as if the center of gravity had shifted permanently. The soreness in my abdomen from the labor flared, a dull, hot ache that reminded me I was not actually healed, just released. I thanked her, took the car seat, and began the slow walk to my SUV. This was the moment where a normal daughter would have called her mother. I unlocked the car, the beep chirping cheerfully in the gray afternoon, and paused. I could picture the conversation. If I called Diane Garcia, my mother, she would have been here 20 minutes early. She would have repacked the diaper bag because I had done it wrong. She would have made a comment about my hair looking greasy, framed as a helpful observation. And then, for the next 6 months, every time I made a parenting decision she disagreed with, she would remind me of how she had to rescue me from the hospital curb because I was too weak to walk. My parents, Diane and Mark, did not give gifts. They gave loans, and the interest rates on their help were exorbitant. They demanded repayment in compliance, in silence, and in total submission to their way of doing things. I looked down at Leo. He shifted in his sleep, his tiny mouth making a sucking motion. "We are going to do this differently." I whispered to him. I secured the car seat into the base in the back. I checked the green level line 3 times. I tugged the strap. It was solid. I was 32 years old. I had a career in graphic design, a mortgage I paid on time, and a husband who loved me. I did not need my mother to drive me 3 miles home. I climbed into the driver's seat. The silence of the car felt heavy. Ethan should have been here. That was the other thought circling my drain of exhaustion. My husband had been sick with guilt when the work trip came up. It was a mandatory certification training in Chicago. One he had tried to postpone 3 times. His boss had finally given him an ultimatum. We had done the math. The baby was not due for another week. He was supposed to be back before labor started. Leo, however, had decided that schedules were merely suggestions and arrived 9 days early. I remembered Ethan's voice on the phone 2 hours ago, thick with emotion. "I can leave now," he had said. "I can just walk out." "No," I had told him. "You have 1 day left. Finish the certification. If you leave now, you lose the promotion, and we need the money for the nursery. Leo and I are fine. We are just going home to sleep." I regretted that confidence now. Just a little. My arms felt like lead. My eyes burned. But I started the engine. The dashboard lit up. A familiar constellation of dials and numbers. That was when I saw it. For a fraction of a second, The red brake warning light flickered on the dashboard. It was a quick pulse, like a heartbeat, and then it vanished. I blinked, rubbing my eyes. I stared at the instrument panel. Nothing. No check engine light. No warnings. Everything looked normal. You are hallucinating from lack of sleep. Victoria. I told myself, you have been awake for 30 hours straight. I put the car in drive and pulled out of the hospital lot. Merging onto the main road that led toward the quieter streets of our neighborhood, the rain started 5 minutes later. It was not a storm, just a steady graying drizzle that made the road slick and turned the afternoon light flat and silver. I turned on the wipers. Slap, squish, slap, squish. The rhythm was hypnotic. I drove cautiously. The speed limit was 35 miles per hour, and I stayed strictly at 30. I checked the rearview mirror every 10 seconds to look at the car seat, even though I could only see the top of the handle. Paranoia was a new companion of mine. I was hyper-aware of every other vehicle. The delivery truck turning left, the teenager texting at the bus stop, the blue sedan tailgating me slightly. I reached the intersection of 4th Street and Elm, a busy 4-way stop near the bottom of a long, gentle hill. The light ahead turned yellow. I was plenty of distance away. I had done this 1,000 times. I lifted my foot from the gas and pressed the brake pedal. It felt spongy. That was the first sensation, a strange, soft resistance, like stepping into a pile of wet leaves instead of against a mechanical lever. I frowned, pressing harder. The car did not slow down. Panic, cold and electric, shot through my chest. The light turned red. Cross traffic was already starting to move. A silver pickup truck was entering the intersection from my right. I slammed my foot down. I put my entire weight on the pedal, driving it into the floor mat. Nothing. The car continued forward, carried by its own momentum and the slick, wet decline of the hill. It was as if the connection between my foot and the wheels had been severed with a knife. "Oh God," I said aloud. I did the only things I could think of in the span of 2 seconds. I honked the horn, a long, desperate blare. I yanked the steering wheel to the right, trying to aim for the curb, for a telephone pole, for anything that wasn't the driver's side door of that silver pickup truck. I almost made it. My front bumper clipped the rear quarter panel of the truck. The impact spun my SUV around violently. The world became a blur of gray sky and wet glass. I felt the tires lose their grip on the asphalt. We were sliding sideways now, completely out of control. Then came the second impact, a dark sedan, coming from the opposite direction and unable to stop in time, slammed into my passenger side. The sound was deafening. It was not like the movies. It was a crunch of metal so loud it vibrated in my teeth. The airbags deployed with the force of a punch, dust filling the cabin instantly. My head whipped sideways, and I felt a sharp, sickening pop in my neck, followed by a searing line of fire down my left side. Then, silence. For a moment, there was absolutely no sound, just the hissing of the radiator and the settling of broken glass. Then, a sound that stopped my heart. Silence from the back seat. Leo. I screamed. The sound of my own voice was ragged. I tried to turn, to reach back, but my body refused to obey. My left arm was pinned against the crushed door, and my chest felt like it had been wrapped in barbed wire. A wave of dizziness washed over me, turning the edges of my vision black. Leo. I screamed again, tears mixing with the dust on my face, and then, the thin, angry wail of a newborn pierced the air. I started sobbing. He was crying. He was alive. The next few minutes were a fragmented nightmare. I heard voices outside. Someone was pulling at my door handle. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" A face appeared at the shattered window. It was a man in a yellow rain slicker. "Do not move. Help is coming. My baby," I gasped, the air whistling in my chest. "Get my baby. We are checking him right now," the man said. "Just stay still." I heard the sirens then, the distinct wail of the Cedar Hollow Fire Rescue. They were loud, getting louder. The door on the other side of the car was wrenched open. I strained my neck, fighting the agony, to see. A paramedic was leaning into the back seat. I saw him unbuckle the car seat from the base. I saw him lift the entire carrier out. "Is he okay?" I choked out. "Please tell me he is okay." The paramedic walked around to my window, holding the carrier so I could see. Leo was screaming. His face beet red, his tiny fists flailing. "He looks stable, Mom," the paramedic said calmly. "He is crying, moving all extremities. That is exactly what we want to hear. But we need to transport him to get checked out." Precautionary. Where I asked. "Cedar Hollow Regional," he said. "Same place you are going." They loaded him into an ambulance before they even got me out of the car. Watching those doors close on my son, while I was trapped in a mangle of steel and glass, was a pain worse than the broken ribs I was about to discover. Extricating me took 20 minutes. Every movement was agony. My left leg was trapped under the dashboard. When they finally pulled me free and laid me on the gurney, the rain felt cold on my face. I was shivering violently, shock setting in. I did everything right. I whispered to the EMT, adjusting my neck brace. "I braked. I promise. I braked. I know." "Sweetheart," she said, checking my pupils with a penlight. "Just relax now. Let us do the work." The ride to the hospital was a blur of lights and the sterile smell of alcohol wipes. I kept asking about Leo. They kept telling me he was arriving ahead of me, at the emergency room. Chaos took over. I was wheeled into a trauma bay. Nurses cut my favorite sweater off my body. Doctors pressed on my stomach, my legs, my chest, X-rays, CT scans, the cold table, the commands to hold your breath. 2 hours later, I was lying in a hospital bed in a room that looked terrifyingly similar to the one I had left that morning, only this time, I was not holding a baby. A doctor with kind eyes and a clipboard stood at the foot of my bed. "Dr. Evans, here is the situation." "Victoria," he said gently, "you have 3 fractured ribs on your left side, you have a severe concussion, and you have a tibial fracture in your left leg that is going to require immobilization. You are not going to be walking on that leg for at least 6 weeks. And Leo," I asked. My voice was a whisper. "He is downstairs in the pediatric wing for observation." "Doctor," Evans said, "he seems perfectly fine. Not a scratch on him. Car seats are miracles of engineering. But because of the force of the impact and his age, we are keeping him for 24 hours just to monitor." I tried to sit up and gasped as pain knifed through my chest. "I need to go to him," I said. "You cannot." "Doctor," Evans said firmly. "Victoria, you are on strong pain medication, and you cannot stand. You are admitted. We are keeping you for at least 2 days to monitor that concussion and manage the pain." The reality settled over me like a shroud. I was incapacitated. I could not lift my baby. I could not walk him to sleep. I could not even change a diaper. I need to call my husband." I said. "We can bring you a phone," he said. When the nurse handed me the landline from the bedside table, I stared at it. I called Ethan first. It went straight to voicemail. He was likely in the middle of the final exam session, his phone locked away in a locker as per the training center's strict rules. I left a message, my voice cracking. "Ethan, it is me. I am at the hospital. There was an accident. Leo is fine. I am hurt, but I am okay. Please come home as soon as you get this." I hung up and looked at the clock on the wall. It was 4 in the afternoon. Ethan was in Chicago. Even if he got the message this second, he wouldn't be here until tomorrow morning at the earliest. Who would take care of Leo? The hospital staff were amazing, but they were not family. And once Leo was cleared for discharge, which could happen as early as tomorrow morning, he would need to go somewhere. I couldn't care for him from this bed. I couldn't even sit up without assistance. I felt the bile of dread rise in my throat. I had no choice. I had run out of options. I dialed the number I knew by heart. It rang 4 times before she picked up. "Hello?" Her voice was crisp, composed. "Mom, Victoria. You sound terrible. Is the baby crying? I told you that feeding schedule was too aggressive." "No." "Mom," I said, tears leaking from my eyes. "I am at the hospital. Cedar Hollow Regional." There was a pause. Silence. Then a sharp intake of breath. "What did you do?" she asked. "I did not do anything," I said, fighting the urge to defend myself and failing. "The car. The brakes didn't work. I was in an accident. Is the baby alive?" Her voice jumped an octave. "Yes, yes, he is fine. He is downstairs being checked. But Mom, I am hurt. I have broken ribs and a broken leg. I cannot move." Another pause, longer this time. I could hear the faint sound of the television in the background of her living room. "Well, that is tragic. Victoria, truly, we will send flowers. Mom." "I do not need flowers," I said, my desperation breaking through the drug haze. "Ethan is in Chicago. He cannot get here until tomorrow. Leo might be discharged before then, and even if he isn't, I cannot take care of him right now. I cannot lift him." I took a deep breath. "I need you and Dad to take him. Just for a day or two. Just until Ethan gets back and I can figure out a home care nurse. Please, he just needs to be fed and held." The silence that followed was heavy. I imagined her standing in her pristine kitchen, looking at her calendar. I imagined Mark, my father, sitting in his armchair, listening. Finally, she spoke. Her voice was smooth, polished, and terrifyingly cold. "Victoria, we cannot do that. What I asked, I thought I had misheard. We are not equipped for a newborn," she said. "We got rid of all those things years ago, and your father has his golf league tomorrow, and I have my book club hosting duties. It is simply not possible." "Mom, this is an emergency," I pleaded. "I am in a hospital bed. I am asking you to hold your grandson because I physically cannot. I understand you are in a difficult spot," she said, as if I were complaining about a long line at the grocery store. "But you are the mother. This is your responsibility. We told you that having a child would require sacrifice. You cannot just dump him on us whenever things get hard." "I am not dumping him," I almost shouted, crying openly now. "I was in a car crash." "Lower your voice. Victoria," she snapped. "You are hysterical. This is exactly why we cannot take him. If you are this unstable, who knows what kind of behavioral issues the child is already picking up." "Mom, please," I whispered. "No," she said. "I am setting a boundary. Mark and I agree. We are too old to be waking up every 2 hours. You need to use proper services. The hospital has social workers, do they not? Let them handle it. That is what taxes are for." "You want me to give my baby to a stranger?" I asked, my voice trembling. "I want you to figure it out," she said. "We are not your safety net. Victoria, we are your parents, not your servants. Call us when you are back in your home and presentable. We will come visit then." Click, the line went dead. I pulled the phone away from my ear and stared at it, the plastic receiver slippery in my sweating palm. The dial tone buzzed, a monotonous, uncaring drone. I sat there, frozen. The physical pain in my leg and chest was screaming for attention, but it was drowned out by a different kind of agony. It was the agony of a realization I had been avoiding for 30 years. They did not care. It wasn't that they were busy. It wasn't that they were strict. It was that when I was broken and bleeding, when my child was alone in a plastic box downstairs, my parents looked at my desperation and saw an inconvenience. I dropped the phone back onto the cradle. I looked up at the ceiling tile, counting the little dots to keep from screaming. 1, 2, 3, 4. I was alone. The door opened, and a nurse bustled in to check my vitals. She smiled sympathetically at my tears. "It hurts, doesn't it, honey?" she asked, adjusting my IV drip. "Yes," I said, closing my eyes. "You have no idea how much it hurts." But I wasn't talking about the ribs. I lay there for an hour, watching the light fade from the window. The rain had stopped, leaving the sky a bruised purple. My mind was racing, trying to solve the logistical puzzle of my life, while my heart lay in pieces on the floor. I needed help, real help, not the conditional, weaponized help my parents offered. I thought of the one person I hadn't called, the one person my mother had spent years isolating me from, calling him difficult and stubborn. My grandfather, Frank Caldwell. He lived in Maple Ridge, about 20 minutes away. He was 78 years old. He drove an old truck and didn't have a smartphone, but he had never looked at me with anything other than warmth. I hesitated. If I called him, Diane would be furious. She hated her father intervening. She hated anyone knowing her business. But then I remembered her voice. Use proper services. I reached for the phone again. My fingers shook as I dialed the number. I hoped he was home. I hoped he would answer. It rang once, twice. Hello? The voice was gruff, deep, and sounded like sandpaper over wood. Grandpa, I whispered. Victoria, he asked. The gruffness vanished instantly, replaced by a sharp alertness. What is wrong? You sound like you are underwater. I need help. Grandpa, I am listening, he said. And for the first time that day, I believed that someone actually was. I took a breath. The pain in my ribs sharp and grounding. I am at the hospital. I said, there was an accident. Mom and Dad won't come. Tell me where you are. He said, I am putting my boots on now. I hung up the phone and let my head fall back against the pillow. The tears finally stopped, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. My mother had set a boundary. She had wanted me to learn a lesson about responsibility. She had no idea what she had just started. I looked out the window at the darkening town of Cedar Hollow. Somewhere out there. My car was sitting in a tow yard, its front end smashed, its secrets buried in the twisted metal. Somewhere in this building, my son was sleeping alone. And somewhere on the road, an old man in a truck was coming to save us. I closed my eyes. Okay, Mom, I thought, you want to play by the rules? Let's see what happens when we follow them all the way to the end. The pain in my chest was a living thing, a sharp, jagged creature that woke up every time I took a breath. But the ache in my heart was worse. I stared at the phone in my lap. The screen was dark, reflecting the fluorescent lights of the hospital room that hummed with an irritating, insect-like buzz. I could not accept their answer. It did not make sense. My parents were people who prided themselves on appearance. They were the couple who volunteered at the annual soup kitchen charity drive provided they could wear the branded t-shirts and be photographed ladling broth. They were the people who shared posts about family values and sacrifice on social media. The idea that they would leave their newborn grandson in the hands of the state rather than inconvenience themselves for 48 hours was so dissonant with their public persona that my brain refused to process it. I told myself I had been too emotional in the first call. I had been crying. I had been desperate. My mother, Diane, despised desperation. She viewed emotion as a lack of discipline. If I wanted a different result, I had to change my tactics. I had to treat this like a business transaction. I had to remove the messiness of my feelings and offer them a problem-free solution. I swallowed dryly, wincing as my bruised throat protested. I picked up the receiver again. My fingers felt heavy and clumsy, like sausages attached to a lead weight, but I dialed. This time. My father answered. Hello? The Garcia residence. His voice was calm, deep, and utterly normal. It was the voice of a man settling in for an evening of television, completely unbothered by the fact that his daughter was lying in a trauma ward. Dad, it is Victoria. I said. I forced my voice to be steady. I pushed down the sob that wanted to climb out of my throat. Victoria, he said, we just got off the phone with you. Your mother is quite upset. You really agitated her. I am sorry, I said, the apology tasting like ash in my mouth. I was in shock. I am calmer now. I wanted to propose a solution that works for everyone. I waited. He did not say anything, so I filled the silence. I know you do not have baby supplies, I said. I can order everything on a same-day delivery service. Diapers, formula, a portable bassinet, wipes, clothes. It will all be delivered to your doorstep within 2 hours. You do not have to spend a penny or go to a single store. I heard him sigh, a long, exasperated sound, and I know you are busy. I continued, rushing to get the words out. I will pay for a night nurse. I have the number of a service. I will pay for someone to come to your house and stay up with the baby so you and Mom can sleep. You just need to be the physical location. You just need to let him be in the house so he is not with strangers." I stopped, my heart pounding against my broken ribs. It was a perfect plan. It cost them nothing. It required almost zero effort. "Victoria," Mark said slowly, using the tone he used when he was explaining to a mechanic why he would not pay for a repair. "You are missing the point. I asked. "This is not about money, and it is not about diapers," he said. "This is about boundaries." I blinked, staring at the white-tiled ceiling. "Boundaries, your mother and I have been discussing this," he said. "You have always relied on us to fix your mistakes. You get into a situation, and you expect us to drop everything. If we swoop in and save you now, what do you learn? You learn that you do not have to be prepared." "I was in a car accident, Dad," I said, my voice rising despite my best efforts. "I was hit by 2 cars. I did not forget my homework. I did not overdraw my checking account. I was nearly killed." "And why were you driving in the rain with a newborn?" he asked. The question took the air out of the room. It was so unfair, so twisted, that I could not find words. "We love you, Victoria," he said, sounding anything but loving, "but we are not going to be rushed into commitments we are not comfortable with just because you are in a panic. This is a moral lesson for you. You need to learn to stand on your own 2 feet, or 1 foot, as the case may be." He chuckled. He actually chuckled at his own joke. "Dad, please," I whispered. "Just take him, please." "No," he said firmly. "We are doing this for your own good. Use the hospital services. It will build character. Good night, Victoria." The line went dead again. I lowered the phone, my hand trembling so hard I dropped it onto the mattress. It bounced with a hollow clatter. They were not coming. The realization was a cold, physical weight in my stomach. It wasn't that they couldn't come. It was that they chose not to. They were using my trauma as a teaching moment. They were framing their cruelty as tough love. I closed my eyes, fighting the black wave of unconsciousness that threatened to pull me under. I had to stay awake. I had one more call to make. I dialed Ethan again. This time, he answered on the first ring. "Tori." "Oh my God. Tori, are you okay?" Hearing his voice broke me. The dam I had built to talk to my father shattered. I started to cry, silent, racking sobs that hurt my chest so much I thought I might die from them. "Tori, talk to me," he shouted, panic in his voice. "Is it Leo? Is he okay?" "Leo is fine," I gasped out. "He is fine. I am broken. Ethan, ribs, leg, but I am alive. Oh, thank God." He breathed. "I got your message. I am at O'Hare right now. I left the training. I don't care about the certification. I am coming home. I knew you would." I said, "But Tori." He hesitated. "The weather is a nightmare. The whole Midwest is grounded. They are saying nothing is taking off until tomorrow morning at the earliest. I am on standby for 3 different airlines. But everything is canceled." I closed my eyes tight. Of course it was raining in Chicago too. "I'm going to rent a car." He said, "I will drive. I can be there in 12 hours. "No," I said, "you cannot drive 12 hours through a storm on no sleep. You will crash too. And then Leo will have nobody. You have to wait for the flight." "But who is with you?" he asked. "Are your parents there? Is your mom holding Leo?" I bit my lips so hard I tasted copper. "No," I said. "What do you mean? Are they on their way? They are not coming." "Ethan, what?" "They refused." I said, "They said it is not their responsibility. They said I need to learn a lesson." There was a silence on the other end of the line that was more terrifying than his shouting. It was the silence of a man who was trying to process pure evil. "I am going to kill them," he said. His voice was low, flat, and terrifyingly serious. "Ethan, stop," I said. "We need to focus on Leo. I cannot take care of him. The doctors won't let me leave the bed. I cannot even hold him without help." "So what happens?" he asked. "What do we do?" I have to let the state take him, I whispered, just for tonight, until you get here. No, Tori, no, we have no choice. I cried out. I have nobody else. We stayed on the phone for another 10 minutes, weeping together across 300 miles of distance. We were two adults, two capable, loving parents, rendered completely helpless by bad luck and the cold hearts of the people who were supposed to love us. When I hung up, I felt hollowed out. I pressed the call button for the nurse. When she arrived, I did not ask for pain meds. I asked for the social worker. 20 minutes later, a woman walked in. She introduced herself as Mrs. Higgins. She was wearing a beige cardigan and had kind, tired eyes. She carried a folder that looked too thin to contain the weight of what we were about to discuss. I understand you are in a difficult situation. Victoria, she said, pulling a chair close to my bedside. Doctor, Evans explained that you have no family available to assist with the infant upon discharge. My husband is trying to get here. I said, my voice raspy. He is stuck in Chicago. It is just for 24 hours, maybe 36. Mrs. Higgins nodded sympathetically. I understand. This happens more often than you would think. We have protocols for this. It is called emergency temporary care. She opened the folder and pulled out a pamphlet. It had a picture of a smiling baby on the front. It looked like propaganda. We work with a network of vetted, licensed emergency caregivers, she explained. These are families who are trained to take in infants on short notice. Your son would be placed in a home here in Cedar Hollow or a neighboring town. He would be fed, clothed, and safe. Would I know where he is? I asked. For safety and privacy reasons, we do not disclose the exact address of the temporary foster family to the biological parents during the stay, she said gently, but you will have a case number, and I will be your point of contact as soon as your husband arrives and can show he is capable of care. We will sign the discharge papers and bring the baby back to you. A stranger, I whispered. You want me to give my 2-day-old son to a stranger? It is the safest option. Victoria, she said, the alternative is you trying to care for him in this condition, which could result in dropping him or neglecting his needs due to your medication. That would trigger a much more serious investigation by Child Protective Services. This is voluntary. This is you making a responsible choice for his safety. She was right. I knew she was right. But it felt like I was signing a confession. It felt like I was failing the very first test of motherhood. My parents live 3 miles away, I said, the tears leaking out of my eyes again. They have a 4-bedroom house. Mrs. Higgins paused. She looked at me with a mixture of pity and professional detachment. Family dynamics can be complicated, she said diplomatically, but right now, we need to focus on the baby. She handed me a pen. I held it over the paper. The text blurred before my eyes. Temporary custody authorization. Emergency placement. I signed it. I handed the clipboard back to her, and with it, I handed away the last shred of my dignity. I will go check on him now. Mrs. Higgins said, standing up, he's doing very well. The nurses say he is a champion eater. We will start the placement process. It usually takes a few hours to find a match. She left the room, and the silence rushed back in to drown me. I lay there, staring at the wall. I felt disconnected from my body. The pain was still there, but it felt like it was happening to someone else. My phone buzzed on the bedside table. I picked it up, expecting a text from Ethan. It was not Ethan. It was a notification from Facebook, a message from Mrs. Gable, a woman who had attended my parents' church for 20 years. Victoria, honey, I just heard about the accident. Your mother asked us to pray for you. She said you are having a very hard time mentally and are very confused. We are praying for your stability and that the doctors can help you find clarity. God bless. I stared at the screen. The words swam before my eyes. Mentally, confused, stability. They were not just refusing to help. They were spinning a story. They were telling people I was crazy. They were planting the seeds of doubt so that when people found out I had put my baby in foster care, it wouldn't look like my parents refused to help. It would look like I was too unstable to trust them with the child. Rage, hot and purifying, finally cut through the despair. They were protecting their reputation at the cost of my sanity. My phone buzzed again. This time, it was a text message. It was from my grandfather. "Frank, I am in the lobby. Coming up." I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. 5 minutes later, the door to my room pushed open. Frank Caldwell did not look like a hero. He looked like a man who had been interrupted in the middle of fixing a fence. He was wearing a plaid flannel shirt, stained jeans, and work boots that clumped heavily on the hospital linoleum. He held a faded baseball cap in his hands. Ringing the brim, his face was a roadmap of wrinkles, weathered by 78 years of sun and hard work, but his eyes were sharp blue flint. "Victoria," he said. He walked to the side of the bed. He did not say anything about the tubes, or the bruises, or the neck brace. He simply reached out and took my hand. His palm was rough, calloused, and warm. "Grandpa." I choked out. "I got here as fast as the truck would go," he said. He pulled the plastic chair closer, the same chair the social worker had used to take my baby away, and sat down. He didn't let go of my hand. He reached into his shirt pocket with his free hand and pulled out his old flip phone. "Your mother sent a text to the family group," he said. I don't usually read those things, but my phone kept beeping. He flipped it open and turned the small, pixelated screen toward me. "Please pray for Victoria. She was in an accident. She is physically okay, but very emotional. There are some legal complications with the car and the baby's custody. We are advised not to get involved until the liability is sorted out. We don't want to complicate the insurance investigation." It is a mess. I read the words, liability, insurance investigation. She made it sound like I had committed a crime. She made it sound like helping me would implicate them in fraud. "That is not true," I whispered. "None of that is true." "I figured," Frank said. He closed the phone with a snap. "Diane never worries about the law unless she is trying to hide something." He looked at me, his expression softening. "Tell me," he said, not what she said. "What actually happened?" I told him. I told him about the brakes, the crash, the ambulance, the doctor telling me I couldn't walk. I told him about calling them. I told him about the boundary. I told him about the social worker and the stranger who was going to take Leo. When I got to the part about the social worker, Frank's hand tightened around mine, his jaw set hard, the muscles jumping in his cheek. "They refused," he asked quietly, "even after you told them you were stuck in this bed." "Yes," I said. "And now you signed papers for a stranger to take the boy I had to—" "Grandpa, Ethan isn't here. I can't take care of him." Frank nodded slowly. He didn't look angry at me. He looked like a man who had just made a very important decision. "Where is this social worker?" he asked. "She just left. Mrs. Higgins. She is probably at the nurse's station." Frank stood up. He put his hat back on his head, adjusting the brim. "You stay here," he said. "Rest." "Where are you going?" I asked. "I'm going to go have a chat with Mrs. Higgins," he said. "There isn't going to be any stranger taking that boy, not while I'm still breathing. But Grandpa, you are—" I stopped. I didn't want to say old. "I am perfectly capable of holding a baby and making a bottle." He said, "I raised your mother, didn't I?" Though I admit, I might have made a few mistakes with that one. He winked at me, a quick, dry flicker of humor, and walked out of the room. I waited. The minutes stretched out. 10 minutes. 20. I began to worry. Maybe he was too old. Maybe they wouldn't let him. He had a heart condition, didn't he? Or was that just something my mother said to keep him from traveling 30 minutes later? The door opened again. Mrs. Higgins walked in, followed by Frank. Mrs. Higgins looked flushed, as if she had been charmed and bulldozed at the same time. "Victoria," she said, "Mr. Caldwell here has offered to serve as the designated temporary caregiver." I looked at Frank. He was standing tall. His chest puffed out slightly. "We have run a preliminary background check," Mrs. Higgins continued. "He has no criminal record. His license is valid, and he is a direct blood relative. This simplifies things immensely. We prefer kinship placement over foster care whenever possible. So he can take him, I asked, hope flaring in my chest like a match. Yes, she said. He will need to sign some forms, and we will need to do a quick home safety checklist with him. But since it is an emergency placement, we can release the infant to him this evening. Thank you. I breathed. Oh God. Thank you. Frank nodded at me. I told you. Mrs. Higgins turned to Frank. We need to go down to the nursery so you can meet the pediatrician and get the discharge instructions. I will be right there. Frank said, Give me a minute with my granddaughter. Mrs. Higgins nodded and left. Frank walked back to my bedside. He looked serious again. I need to make a phone call, he said. To who? To your parents, he said. If I am taking the boy, they need to know, not because I care what they think, but because I want to hear what they say when I tell them. He pulled out his phone again and dialed. He put it on speaker and held it out so I could hear. It rang 3 times. Hello, Diane's voice. She sounded annoyed. Diane, it is Frank. Dad. Why are you calling? Is everything okay? I am at the hospital with Victoria, he said. There was a pause, a sharp, tense silence. Oh, she said. I see. Did she call you? She did, Frank said, and I'm glad she did. I am calling to tell you that you don't need to worry about those legal complications you texted everyone about. What do you mean? I mean I am taking the baby, Frank said. I just spoke to the social worker. I am taking custody of the boy until Ethan gets home. He is coming to my house. The reaction was instantaneous and bizarre. What Diane's voice shot up into a shriek. You can't do that. Why not? Frank asked calmly. Dad, you are 78 years old. You cannot handle a newborn. It is dangerous. What if you fall? What if you have a heart attack? The baby will be unattended. I am in better shape than Mark, Frank said, and I have plenty of help if I need it. No, Dad, listen to me, Diane said, her voice turning frantic. Mark, get on the extension. Dad, you do not understand. There are liability issues. If you take that baby, you are involving yourself in a potential lawsuit. You need to let the state handle this. Let the professionals take him. Why are you so worried about liability? Diane Frank asked. His eyes were locked on mine. Victoria was the one driving. It was her car. It is complicated. Mark's voice joined in, breathless and tight. Frank, listen. We are trying to protect the family assets. If you take the baby, it creates a link. It creates a paper trail of custody. We have been advised that it is better if the family is not formally involved until the insurance settles. Who advised you of that? Frank asked. Our counsel. Mark stammered. Frank didn't say anything for a long moment. He just looked at the phone, his eyebrows drawn together. Well, he said finally, you can tell your counsel that I don't give a damn about the family assets. I care about my great-grandson. I am taking him home. Dad, do not do this. Diane shouted. I am forbidding it. You are forbidding it, Frank asked, his voice dropping to a low rumble. Diane, I am not asking for your permission. I am informing you of a fact. I am taking the boy, and we are going to have a very long talk about this liability when things settle down. He hung up the phone before she could scream again. The silence in the room was heavy. Frank looked at me. His expression was no longer just determined. It was suspicious. Did you hear that? He asked. I nodded. They sounded terrified. They did. Frank said, he tapped the phone against his chin. Thinking, they didn't want the baby, he muttered. But they really didn't want me to have the baby. They wanted him in the system. They wanted him lost in paperwork for a few days. Why, I asked. That, Frank said, his eyes darkening, is a very good question. Mark started talking about family assets and paper trails. Since when does babysitting a newborn threaten a bank account? I don't know. I said. Frank put the phone back in his pocket. He patted my hand one last time. Rest, Victoria. I am going to get Leo. I will take him to Maple Ridge. I will set up the nursery in the spare room. I will video call you as soon as we are settled. He turned to the door. And Victoria. Yes, don't answer your parents if they call back. Let them sweat. He walked out the door, his boots thumping rhythmically. I lay back against the pillows. The pain in my body was still there, but the panic in my heart had been replaced by something else. A cold, hard curiosity. My grandfather was right. My parents weren't just being cruel, they were being careful. They were hiding something, and whatever it was terrified of a newborn baby. I closed my eyes, and for the first time in 10 hours, I slept. The digital clock on the wall glowed with red numbers that read 2 in the morning. The hospital was never truly quiet. It breathed with the rhythmic hissing of oxygen tanks, the squeak of rubber soles on linoleum, and the distant, muffled chimes of call buttons. I lay awake, the pain in my ribs a dull, throbbing companion that made every shift of my body a calculated negotiation. My phone sat propped against a pitcher of water on the tray table. The screen lit up, cutting through the gloom. It was an incoming video call from Frank. I tapped the green button, my heart hammering against the bruised cage of my chest. The image resolved, slightly grainy but clear enough. I saw my grandfather's living room in Maple Ridge. It was exactly as I remembered it, paneling that had been out of style for 30 years. The heavy velvet drapes drawn tight, and the massive stone fireplace that always smelled faintly of ash and cedar. Frank was sitting in his leather recliner, the one that had molded to his shape over decades, and there, cradled in the crook of his arm, was Leo.
"Oh, Grandpa," I whispered, my voice cracking.
"He is asleep," Frank said softly. His voice was a low rumble through the phone speaker. He took 3 ounces of formula at midnight, burped like a longshoreman, and went right back down. He shifted the phone so I could get a better look. Leo was wrapped in a yellow blanket. I recognized it was one Frank had kept in the cedar chest, crocheted by my grandmother before she passed. My son looked tiny, peaceful, and completely safe. "He is okay?" I asked, the tears stinging my eyes again. "He is perfect," Frank said. "I have got a logbook going. I am tracking the ounces, the wet diapers, and the sleep times, just like you wrote down." He held up a small spiral notebook. I could see his neat, blocky handwriting filling the first page. I felt a wave of relief so profound it made me dizzy. My son was not with a stranger. He was in the house where I had learned to ride a bike, in the arms of the man who had taught me how to fish. But right behind the relief came the grief. It was a sharp, biting cold. My parents should have been doing this. Diane should have been the one holding him, complaining about the brand of bottles but cooing at his face. Mark should have been pacing the floor, talking about college funds. Instead, they were 3 miles away in their silent, pristine house, sleeping soundly because they had successfully defended their boundary. Frank turned the camera back to his face. He looked tired, his eyes shadowed under his bushy white brows, but his gaze was intense. "Victoria," he said, "we need to talk." "Now?" I asked. "Yes, now, while it is quiet. I have been sitting here watching this boy sleep, and I have been thinking about why your parents did this." He said, "I know Diane. She is selfish, and she is cold, but she is also obsessed with appearances. Leaving her daughter in a trauma ward and her grandson in foster care is a public relations nightmare. It does not fit." "I told you, Grandpa. They said they weren't equipped." Frank shook his head. "That is a lie. Diane has a room full of unused furniture she bought for the guest room last year. Mark has a truck. They have money. Not equipped is what you say when you don't have a car seat. It is not what you say when you are the grandparents." He leaned closer to the phone. "There is something else. Victoria. Something they are afraid of." I frowned, the pain medication making my thoughts sluggish. "Afraid of what I want you to think back," Frank said. "The last few weeks, before the accident. Was there anything odd? Did they ask you for anything? Did they push you to do anything financial?" I closed my eyes, trying to sift through the fog of the last month. The end of my pregnancy had been a blur of swelling ankles and nursery painting. "No," I said, "just the usual criticism. Mom didn't like the crib we picked. Dad thought we spent too much on the stroller. Think harder." Frank pressed. Did they offer to help with anything specific? Paperwork accounts. My eyes snapped open. Paperwork. About a week ago, I said slowly. Diane came over. It was a Tuesday. She brought a folder. What was in the folder? Frank asked. She called it responsible planning. I said, she said that since Ethan travels for work, and I would be on maternity leave, we needed to have emergency contingencies in place. She had these forms. She wanted me to sign them. What kind of forms? Power of attorney, I think, and something about temporary guardianship. She said it was standard. She said if something happened during the birth, they needed to be able to make decisions immediately without waiting for a judge. Frank's face went still. Did you sign them? He asked. No, I said. I told her Ethan and I had our wills done last year. I told her Ethan was my proxy. How did she react? She got mad. I remembered. The memory was sharper now. She got really tight in the face. She said Ethan wasn't reliable because he was always gone. She said I was being naive. She kept pushing the pen at me. She said, just sign it. Victoria, it simplifies things if there is an accident. If there is an accident, the words hung in the air between us, heavy and ominous. Frank looked away from the camera for a moment, staring into the fire. When he looked back, his expression was grim. Check your phone, he said. Look at the texts she sent you after that visit. I minimized the video window and opened my message history with my mother. I scrolled back a week. There it was. A wall of blue bubbles from Diane. Victoria, I really think you are making a mistake not signing those forms. We just want to protect the baby. If something happens to you, the state gets involved. Do you want the government raising your child? We need to keep things simple. Temporary custody is just a formality. Mark is very worried about the liability of you not having a backup plan. I read them out loud to Frank. When I got to the word liability, Frank let out a short, harsh sound that might have been a laugh if it weren't so angry. Liability, he repeated. That is their favorite word this week. What does it mean? Grandpa, I asked. Why would they want custody papers before I even gave birth? Because, Frank said slowly, if they have custody, or if they have power of attorney, they control the money, and they control the narrative. What money? I asked. Ethan and I do not have money. We have a mortgage and student loans. I don't know yet, Frank said, but I'm going to find out. He adjusted the blanket around Leo. Victoria, I need you to do something for me. I need you to give me permission to go look at your car. My car? I asked. The police said it is totaled. It is at the impound lot on the south side. I know, Frank said, but I want to see it, and I want to bring someone with me. A mechanic I trust. Jimmy Miller from Pinecrest Auto.
Why?
Because you are a good driver, Frank said. You have been driving since you were 16. You don't just plow into an intersection because you forgot how the pedal works. I told you. The brakes felt spongy. They didn't bite. Exactly, Frank said. And brakes don't just stop working on a 5-year-old SUV that you maintain perfectly, not unless something made them stop working. A chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning washed over me. You think someone tampered with my car? I think your parents are acting like people who are terrified of an investigation, Frank said, and I think we need to know why. He looked at me, his eyes soft again. Get some sleep, kid. You look like hell. I have got the night watch. I will, I whispered. Kiss him for me. I watched him lean down and press a gentle kiss to Leo's forehead. Good night, Victoria. The screen went black. I did not sleep well. I drifted in and out of nightmares where I was stomping on a brake pedal that turned into water, while my mother stood on the sidewalk holding a folder and shaking her head. The next morning, the sun was blinding. It cut through the hospital blinds in sharp, dusty slats. At 10 o'clock, the door to my room opened. I expected a nurse. I expected Dr. Evans. Instead, Diane and Mark Garcia walked in. They were dressed immaculately. Diane was wearing a navy blazer and pearls, her hair sprayed into a helmet of perfection. Mark was in a polo shirt tucked into khakis, his phone clipped to his belt. They looked like they were arriving for a real estate closing, not a visit to their injured daughter. Victoria, Diane said. She stopped at the foot of the bed. She did not come closer to hug me. She did not touch my leg. She stood at a safe distance. Mom, I said. Dad, you look stable, Mark said, looking at the monitors rather than my face. I have 3 broken ribs and a shattered leg. I said, I am on morphine. I am not exactly stable. Diane waved her hand dismissively. We came to check on the situation. She said, we tried to call the social worker this morning, but she wouldn't release any information to us. She said the case was closed. I watched them. I really looked at them. For years. I had seen them through the lens of a daughter seeking approval. I had seen their criticism as helpfulness, their control as love, but now, with Frank's voice in my head, I saw them differently. I saw the tightness around Diane's mouth. I saw the way Mark's hands were opening and closing at his sides. They weren't concerned. They were agitated. The case is closed, I said. So where is the child? Diane asked sharply. Is he in the system? Did they place him? Why does it matter? I asked. You said you couldn't take him. You said to use the proper services. I used them. We need to know where he is. Victoria, Mark said, his voice dropping to that lecturing tone. We need to know if you signed any state forms. Did you sign over custody to the county? I signed a temporary authorization. I said. Diane let out a sharp breath. You foolish girl, she hissed. Do you know what that does? It opens a file. It creates a record of what I asked, of incompetence. Diane snapped. If there is an investigation into the accident. She stopped herself. She glanced at Mark. Where is the baby? Victoria, Mark asked firmly. We need to go get him. I stared at him. Excuse me, I said. We have discussed it, Mark said, smoothing his shirt. We have decided that, despite the inconvenience, we cannot have a Garcia living with strangers. It looks bad. We are willing to take him. We have cleared our schedule. You are willing to take him now, I asked, now that I have already gone through the trauma of giving him up. Don't be dramatic, Diane said. Just tell us where he is. We will go pick him up and bring him to our house. We can have the papers transferred. I looked at them, and I felt a sudden, burning clarity. They didn't want to help. They wanted to hide him. They wanted to control where he was, who saw him, and what paperwork existed around him. He is not with strangers, I said. Diane froze. What? He is with family, I said. Who? Mark demanded. Ethan is in Chicago. Frank has him, I said. The reaction was electric. Diane actually took a step back, as if I had slapped her. Mark's face drained of color. My father, Diane screeched. You gave a newborn baby to my father. He is family, I said calmly, and he is an approved temporary caregiver. The social worker signed off on it last night. He is at his house in Maple Ridge. No, Diane said. No, absolutely not. He is senile. He is old. He cannot handle a baby. He seems to be handling it fine. I said, I video called him last night. Victoria, you have to revoke it, Mark said. He moved to the side of the bed, invading my space. You have to sign a transfer. We will take the baby. Frank is not stable. He asks too many questions. He will confuse things. What things? I asked. What is there to confuse? It is a baby. He eats and sleeps. You don't understand, Diane said, her voice rising to a panic I had never heard from her before. Dad is difficult. He will turn this into a circus. You need to sign the baby over to us. Now. She reached into her oversized purse and pulled out a folder. The same folder she had brought to my house a week ago. I have the papers right here, she said. Just sign the bottom. We will take care of the rest. We will go get him from Dad's house. I looked at the folder. Emergency guardianship. They had brought the papers to the hospital. They had refused to pick up my son when he was alone and I was helpless. But they had driven here with legal documents to take him away from my grandfather. It wasn't about the baby. It was about Frank. They were terrified of Frank having access to my son. I looked at my mother. No, I said. Diane blinked. Excuse me, I said no. I am not signing anything. Frank has him. He is safe. And frankly, he is the only one who offered to help without making me feel like a burden. Victoria. This is a mistake, Mark warned. A very expensive mistake. Is that a threat? Dad. I asked. It is a reality check. He said. Get out. I said. They stood there for a moment. Stunned. I had never kicked them out. I had never raised my voice to them. I said, get out, I shouted, the pain in my ribs flaring white-hot. Diane glared at me with pure venom. You will regret this, she said. They turned and marched out of the room, the heavy door swinging shut behind them with a final click. I lay back, trembling. My hands were shaking so hard I had to grip the bedsheets. They were scared. They were truly, deeply scared. My phone rang. It was Frank. I picked up, putting it to my ear. They were just here. I said, my voice shaking. I know. Frank said, I called to warn you, but the line was busy. Did they try to get you to sign the papers? Yes. They had them in her purse. They wanted to take Leo. They freaked out when I said you had him. Frank let out a low grunt. I bet they did. Where are you? I asked. I heard wind in the background. I am at the tow yard. Frank said, I have got Jimmy Miller with me. And I held my breath. Victoria, Frank said, his voice grim. Jimmy is writing the report right now. But you need to know. Know what the brake line didn't burst from pressure. Frank said, the nut connecting the line to the master cylinder was loose. Not stripped, loose, like someone took a wrench to it and backed it off just enough that it would hold fluid for a while. But eventually it would fail. I finished. And there is no fluid on the ground where you were parked at the hospital, Frank said, which means it leaked out slowly while you were driving. I felt sick. Grandpa, I whispered, who would do that? Frank paused. I don't know yet, he said, but your parents were awfully worried about liability, and they were awfully eager to get you to sign those guardianship papers before the baby was even born. He took a breath. Victoria, this isn't just a family dispute anymore. If that brake line was tampered with, this is attempted murder. I stared at the white ceiling. The hospital room felt suddenly very small and very cold. What do we do? I asked. I am going to get this report notarized, Frank said. Then I am going to call a lawyer, not one of your parents' friends, a real one. Grandpa. I said, be careful. You too, kid. He said, don't sign anything. Don't let them in again. I hung up. I lay there in the silence. I thought about my mother's perfectly sprayed hair. I thought about my father's obsession with assets. I thought about the way they had looked at me not with love, but with calculation. They weren't refusing my child because they were lazy. They were refusing him because they were guilty, and Frank Caldwell was coming for them. The paper in Frank's hand was yellow, a carbon copy from a mechanic's invoice pad, and it rattled slightly as he held it out to me. The sound was thin and dry, like dead leaves skittering on pavement. I was sitting up in the hospital bed, propped by 3 pillows. My leg was encased in a heavy fiberglass cast, and my chest felt like it was held together by duct tape and prayer. But my mind was clearing. The fog of shock was lifting, replaced by a sharp, high-frequency anxiety that hummed in my ears. Read the notes at the bottom, Frank said. I took the paper. It was from Pinecrest Auto Repair. I knew the place. It was a dusty, no-nonsense shop on the edge of town where the coffee was terrible, but the diagnostics were gospel. I skipped past the vehicle identification number and the standard checklist of tires and fluids. My eyes landed on the handwritten section in the mechanic's cramped, all-caps script. Inspection of brake master cylinder reveals fluid level critically low. No evidence of line rupture or sudden failure from impact. Fitting nut at rear output. Line found loosened 3 full turns. Threads are clean and undamaged. Inconsistent with vibration or road wear. Fluid loss appears gradual over previous 24 hours. Pattern is consistent with manual interference. I read it twice. Manual interference. It was a polite way of saying someone had touched it. Someone with a wrench. Someone who knew that if you loosened a nut just enough, the fluid would weep out slowly, drop by drop, until the moment you needed the brakes the most and found nothing but air. I looked up at Frank. My mouth felt incredibly dry. "He is sure," I whispered. "Jimmy is careful," Frank said. "He won't say it is 100% sabotage because he wasn't there to see it happen. But he told me that in 40 years of fixing cars, he has never seen a brake line backing nut back itself off 3 turns without stripping the threads. Unless a human hand turned it." I let the paper fall to the blanket. "I drove my son in that car," I said. The realization hit me like a physical blow, harder than the airbag had. I put Leo in the back seat. Frank pulled the chair closer. His face was grim, the lines around his mouth etched deep with anger. "Victoria, we need to talk about what I did this morning while you were sleeping. There is more," I asked. "After I left the tow yard, I went to see an old friend of mine, Alan Pierce. He is a partner at Hollis Pierce Law Group." I nodded. They were the biggest firm in Cedar Hollow. They handled everything from corporate mergers to high-stakes divorces. I wanted to ask him about 2 things. Frank said, "First, I wanted to formalize the temporary guardianship so your parents cannot challenge it with some loophole. And second, I wanted to know how to stop them from bullying you into signing things while you are on narcotics." He paused, resting his hands on his knees. Alan did a quick search of the county clerk's recent filings, just to see if there was any existing paperwork on you or Ethan. "And your parents filed a petition 3 weeks ago." Frank said. I frowned. "A petition for what?" "For pre-need standby guardianship." Frank said, "It is a legal instrument usually used by parents who are terminally ill or deploying to a war zone. It designates a guardian to take over immediately if the parents become incapacitated." I stared at him. "I am not terminally ill, and Ethan is just in Chicago." "Exactly," Frank said. "But the paperwork they filed claimed that due to Ethan's excessive travel and your history of anxiety, they should be named the automatic decision-makers for any future children in the event of a medical emergency. They tried to get custody before Leo was even born," I asked, my voice rising in pitch. "They tried to position themselves as the default." Frank corrected. "The judge hadn't signed off on it yet because you hadn't been notified, but the intent was there. They were building a cage for you. Victoria, they wanted to make sure that if anything happened like a car accident, they would hold the keys to your life and your child." I felt a wave of nausea. "That is why Diane came to the house," I said. "That is why she brought those forms. She wasn't just being pushy. She was trying to get me to consent to something she had already filed." Frank nodded. "And when you refused, they got desperate." I looked at the mechanic's report again. Manual interference. "Desperate enough to loosen a brake line," I asked. "My parents are controlling. Grandpa, they are narcissistic. But are they murderers?" Frank didn't answer immediately. He looked out the window at the parking lot below. "People do terrible things when they are afraid," he said finally. "And your parents are terrified. I don't think they wanted to kill you. I think they wanted an accident. They wanted you hospitalized. They wanted you incapacitated just long enough for that emergency clause to kick in so they could step in as guardians." But why, I asked, tears of frustration leaking from my eyes. Why do they want Leo so bad? They don't even like babies. Diane didn't even want to hold him when he was born. That is the million-dollar question. Frank said, "And I intend to find the answer." We sat in silence for a moment. The room felt smaller, the air thinner. I felt a creeping sensation of doubt. The old familiar voice that had been planted in my head since childhood. Maybe I am imagining it. I thought, maybe the mechanic is wrong. Maybe the legal filing was just them being overprotective. Maybe I am the crazy one. Just like they told the church group. I looked at Frank. "Am I crazy?" I asked. Frank reached out and took my hand. His grip was iron solid. "You are the sanest person in this family," he said, "and that is exactly why they are trying to break you. Do not let them rewrite the reality. Victoria, you saw the brake light flicker. You felt the pedal go soft. You heard them refuse to help. Those are facts. Hold on to them." Before I could answer, the door to the room burst open. A man stood there, his hair wild, his clothes rumpled, his eyes scanning the room frantically. He was soaking wet, as if he had run from the parking lot in the rain. "Ethan, Tori," he shouted. He crossed the room in 2 strides and collapsed onto the side of the bed, burying his face in my neck. He smelled of airport coffee and stale airplane air and rain. He was shaking. "I am here." He sobbed into my shoulder. "I am here. I am so sorry." I held him as best I could with my broken ribs, wrapping my good arm around his head. "It is okay," I whispered. "You are here now." He pulled back, his hands framing my face. He looked at the bruises, the neck brace, the cast. His eyes filled with a dark, profound pain. "I should never have gone," he said. "I should have quit." "Stop," I said. "We needed the money." "You didn't know." He kissed my forehead, then my cheek, then my hand. Then he stood up and turned to Frank. Ethan had met my grandfather only a handful of times. Diane made sure of that. She always scheduled family events when she knew Frank couldn't make it, or made us feel guilty for visiting him, but Ethan knew who he was. "Frank," Ethan said. He walked over and extended his hand. Frank took it. "Thank you," Ethan said. His voice was steady, despite the tears in his eyes. "Victoria told me on the phone, you saved our son. You took him when nobody else would." "I did what family does," Frank said simply. "The boy is doing fine. He is sleeping in my den. I have a neighbor watching him right now, so I could come here. I want to see him." Ethan said, "I need to see him." "You will," Frank said. "As soon as you visit with your wife, you go to my house. The key is under the mat. But first, you need to know what we are dealing with." Frank handed the mechanic's report to Ethan. Ethan read it standing up. His face, usually so open and expressive, went completely still. He read it with the precision of an engineer, which he was. He looked at the data, the conclusion, the signature. When he looked up, the sadness was gone from his eyes. It was replaced by a cold, hard clarity. "This says someone tampered with the car," Ethan said. Frank nodded. "It does. And my in-laws," Ethan said, turning to look at me, refused to take the baby, and then tried to get Victoria to sign custody papers. "Yes," I said. Ethan placed the paper gently on the tray table. He took a deep breath, exhaling slowly through his nose. "Okay," he said. He didn't scream. He didn't punch the wall. He didn't rant. It was the most terrifying reaction I had ever seen from him. It was the reaction of a man who has just decided that he is at war. "Okay," he repeated. "Then they are never touching him again." Just then, there was a knock at the door. We all turned. Diane stood there. She was holding a casserole dish covered in aluminum foil. A large gift bag sat at her feet. She was smiling, but it was a brittle, painted-on smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Oh," she said, feigning surprise. "Ethan, you made it." "Diane," Ethan said. He didn't move toward her. He stood between her and my bed, like a shield. "I brought some lasagna," she said, stepping into the room as if she hadn't been screamed at 3 hours ago. "And I picked up that crib you wanted. The expensive one. It is in the car." "We don't need a crib," Ethan said. "We have a crib." "Well, you can have a spare," she said breezily. She set the lasagna on the counter. "Look," she said, clasping her hands together. "Mark and I have been thinking. We got off on the wrong foot. We were just shocked by the accident. We weren't thinking clearly." She reached into her purse. "We want to help," she said. "We want to pay for a night nurse. We want to pay for the best care. We just need to regularize things." She pulled out a single sheet of paper. It wasn't the thick folder from before. It looked like a typed letter. "This is just a simple family agreement," she said, holding it out toward Ethan. "It just says that we are authorized to help with decisions until Victoria is fully recovered. It helps us access the funds to pay for things for you. It is temporary, just until you are back on your feet." I looked at Frank. He hadn't moved. Ethan took the paper. He didn't read it. He just held it. "Does this give you custody?" Ethan asked. "No." Diane laughed nervously. "Heavens, no. It grants us temporary authority. To help. Frank cleared his throat. It was a loud, rumbling sound. Ethan, Frank said, do not sign that. I wasn't planning to. Ethan said. He handed the paper back to Diane. If you want to help, Diane, you can apologize to your daughter for leaving her alone in a trauma ward. Ethan said. But we are not signing anything. Diane's smile faltered. Frank, she snapped, turning on him, this is your doing, isn't it? You are in his ear. You are turning them against the family. I am the family, Frank said calmly. I am the one who is actually taking care of the child. You are a senile old man who is confusing everything, Diane hissed. Her face contorted, the mask slipping completely. You are making them paranoid. We are not paranoid. Diane, I said from the bed. My voice was weak, but clear. We are just reading the fine print, which is something you taught me to do. Diane glared at me. Her eyes were cold, hard stones. You are making a mistake, Victoria. You are choosing to be difficult when we are offering you a lifeline. We don't want your lifeline. Ethan said, please leave. Diane stood there for a long moment, vibrating with rage. Then she grabbed her purse. She left the lasagna. She turned and marched out. I watched her go, feeling a strange mixture of triumph and nausea. Ethan turned to me. I am going to go get some water, he said. I need to walk for a second. He stepped out into the hallway. I looked at Frank. They are not going to stop. Are they? I asked. No, Frank said. They have too much to lose. Through the open door, I could hear voices in the hallway. Ethan. It was my father's voice. Mark. I strained to listen. Frank stood up and moved silently to the door, cracking it wider so we could hear. Mark sounded low, conspiratorial. Ethan, son, I am glad I caught you. What do you want? Mark Ethan sounded exhausted. Look, Diane is emotional. You know how she gets. But I want to talk man to man. I could hear the shuffle of feet. You are a smart guy. Ethan, Mark said, you understand numbers. You understand leverage. I understand that you refuse to help my wife. Ethan said. Forget that for a second, Mark said, dismissing it. Look, I know you and Victoria are struggling. Student loans, the mortgage, it adds up. What is your point? My point is, you are letting Frank cloud your judgment. He is poisoning the well. If you side with him, you are cutting yourself off from a lot of resources. Are you trying to bribe me? Mark, I am trying to help you see the big picture. Mark's voice rose slightly. Breathless and agitated, you are using Victoria's accident to play the victim. But you don't understand the complexity here. That baby complicates the family assets. Complicates the assets, Ethan repeated. Yes, Mark hissed. It changes the structure. If you just let us handle the guardianship, we can structure it so everyone wins. But if you let Frank create a paper trail, you are going to cost this family a fortune. Do not be an idiot, Ethan. Don't let a temporary crisis ruin your financial future. There was a silence. Mark, Ethan said, his voice deadly quiet. If you ever come near my son with a contract again, I will call the police. You are making a mistake, Mark called out. I heard Ethan's footsteps walking away, down the hall toward the elevators. Frank closed the door gently. He turned back to me. Did you hear that Frank asked? I nodded. That baby complicates the family assets. Frank walked over to the window. He looked out at the skyline of Cedar Hollow. It makes no sense, I said. How does a baby complicate assets? We don't have a trust fund. We don't have an inheritance. You don't, Frank said. But I do. I looked at him. You, Frank, turned around. Victoria, when your grandmother died. We set up a trust, Caldwell Creek Holdings. It holds the family business interests, the timber land, the commercial properties downtown. It is not a fortune, but it is substantial. I knew about the land, but I thought Mom and Dad managed all that. They do, Frank said. I made them trustees 5 years ago because I was getting tired of the paperwork. I gave them management rights, but I remained the primary beneficiary. And who is the secondary, I asked. Diane, Frank said. And then you. So why does the baby matter? Because, Frank said, his eyes narrowing, there is a clause in the original trust deed. I put it in there 40 years ago and forgot about it. It says that upon the birth of the first great-grandchild, the trust effectively splits. A portion of the principal is supposed to be segregated immediately into a separate education and welfare fund for the child, administered by an independent fiduciary. I stared at him. It takes money away from them. It takes control away from them, Frank said. If Leo exists legally, if he is registered, if his birth certificate is filed with the trust, then a percentage of the assets moves out of their control and into a protected account for him. And if they have guardianship, I asked, then they are the guardians of that protected account. Frank said, they keep control of the money. But if they don't have guardianship, then an independent party takes it. Frank said, or the parents do, meaning you and Ethan. But that is just greed, I said. That is just them wanting to control the money. Why would they tamper with my car? Why would they risk killing me? Frank's face darkened. Because, Victoria, if the trust is audited to set up Leo's portion, they might be afraid of what the auditor will find. My heart stopped. You think they stole from the trust, I think? Frank said slowly. That if Mark is talking about complicating assets and Diane is terrified of paper trails, it is because the money that is supposed to be there isn't. He walked over to his jacket hanging on the hook and put it on. I need to make a call to the bank, he said. And then I need to call Hollis Pierce again. What are you going to do? I asked. I'm not going to accuse them, Frank said. Not yet. I don't have the proof, but I'm going to force them to show their hand. How I am going to invite them to a meeting, Frank said. I am going to tell them that since I have the baby, I have decided to update my estate plan. I am going to tell them they need to come over to my house to hear the new terms before they make another mistake. He opened the door. If they are innocent, they will be annoyed, he said. If they are guilty, they will be terrified. He looked back at me one last time. Rest up. Victoria. Ethan will be back in a minute. The war starts tomorrow. He walked out, and I was left alone in the silence, listening to the hum of the machines and the terrifying, unspoken truth that my parents had tried to erase my family to save their own skin. The fire in my grandfather's hearth was burning low, casting long, dancing shadows against the wood-paneled walls of his living room. It was a cozy room, the kind filled with the scent of old paper, cedar, and lemon polish. But today it felt like a courtroom. I was sitting in Frank's recliner, my left leg elevated on a stack of pillows, a knitted afghan draped over my lap to hide the bulk of the cast. The pain in my ribs was a dull, constant throb, kept at bay by the medication and the adrenaline that was slowly pumping through my veins. Ethan sat on the arm of the chair, his hand resting protectively on my shoulder. Across the room, near the hallway door, a woman named Clara, a postpartum doula Frank had hired that morning through an agency, was gently rocking Leo in her arms. Seeing my son there, clean and fed and peaceful, gave me the strength to keep my breathing steady. We were waiting, at 2:00 exactly. The sound of a car engine cut through the silence, then car doors slamming, then the doorbell. Frank walked to the door. He was dressed in a fresh button-down shirt and his good slacks, his hair combed back. He looked like the patriarch he was, a man who had built a life out of timber and grit. He opened the door. Diane and Mark walked in. They brought the outside air with them, cool and damp. They stopped when they saw the arrangement. They saw me in the chair. They saw Ethan guarding me. They saw the woman holding the baby. And they saw Frank, who closed the door behind them and locked the deadbolt with a heavy, metallic click. Mom, Dad, I said. My voice was quiet. Victoria, Diane said, rushing forward, her hands outstretched. Oh, look at you. We were so worried when you checked out against medical advice. You really should be in a facility. I am fine. Mom, I said, shrinking back slightly. Diane's eyes darted to the baby. Is that him? She asked. She moved toward Clara. Well, let me see my grandson. No, Frank said. His voice wasn't loud, but it stopped her in her tracks. Frank walked past them and stood in front of the fireplace. On the small coffee table in the center of the seating arrangement, He had placed 3 neat stacks of paper. "Sit down," Frank said. Diane bristled. "Dad, we don't have time for a lecture. We came to pick up Victoria and the baby. We have the guest room ready." "Sit down," Frank repeated. There was something in his tone, a finality that I had never heard before, that made Mark grab Diane's elbow and steer her toward the love seat. They sat, looking for all the world like 2 teenagers called into the principal's office, trying to maintain an air of bored superiority. Frank remained standing. He picked up the first stack of papers. "I brought you here because we need to clear the air," Frank said. "There has been a lot of confusion in the last 48 hours. A lot of talk about boundaries and liability." Mark cleared his throat. "Frank, we were just trying to protect the family. Victoria was emotional. We made a judgment call. Let's talk about that judgment call," Frank said. He picked up a sheet of notepad paper. "This is a transcript of the conversation Victoria had with you from the hospital," Frank said. "She wrote it down for me. You told her you were not equipped to take the baby. You told her it was not your responsibility. You told her to use state services." "We were in shock," Diane protested. "We didn't mean it literally. We just wanted her to access the professional help available." Frank held up a hand. "But then," he continued, "when I offered to take the baby, when a family member stepped up, you panicked. You called me and told me not to do it. You cited legal complications. You texted the entire family telling them Victoria was unstable. We were worried about her mental state," Mark said. Frank picked up the second document. "It was the mechanic's report. And then there is this," Frank said, "the inspection of Victoria's car." Mark went very still. Diane frowned, confused. "What is that?" she asked. "It is a report from Pinecrest Auto," Frank said. "It states that the brakemaster cylinder was tampered with. A nut was loosened manually." Diane's face went white. She looked at Mark. Mark stared straight ahead at the fireplace, his jaw working. "That is ridiculous," Mark said, his voice a little too high. "Old cars break. It is a 5-year-old car." "Mark," Frank said, "and you were the one who insisted on taking it for a safety check 2 weeks ago. You told Victoria you wanted to top off the fluids." I looked at my father. I remembered that. He had come over on a Sunday. He said he wanted to be a good grandfather and check the oil. He had spent an hour in the garage. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. "I was just checking the oil," Mark snapped. "I didn't touch the brakes." Frank placed the report back on the table. He didn't argue. He just let the accusation hang there in the air, heavy and suffocating. "You refused the baby," Frank said, shifting gears. "You told Victoria you were afraid of doing something wrong. But that is a lie." "Diane, it is not a lie." Diane cried. "I haven't cared for a newborn in 30 years. I offered to pay for a night nurse. I said from the chair, I offered to have everything delivered. You wouldn't have had to lift a finger. You still said no. Because we didn't want the disruption," Diane shouted, her composure cracking. "No," Frank said softly. "You didn't want the record." He picked up the third stack of papers. These were different. They were thick, bound with a staple, and marked with the logo of a bank. "Diane, Mark," Frank said, "I want to talk about Caldwell Creek Holdings." The room went instantly, terrifyingly silent. I saw the color drain from my mother's face. It didn't just fade, it vanished, leaving her skin looking like gray paste. Mark let out a breath that sounded like a hiss. "I don't know what you are talking about," Mark said. "I think you do," Frank said. "You see, when I took the baby yesterday, I started thinking about why you were so obsessed with liability and assets. Mark kept telling Ethan that the baby complicated things. So, this morning, while Victoria was sleeping, I called the bank. I requested a full audit of the trust's transaction history for the last 24 months. Frank put on his reading glasses. He looked down at the paper. It was educational. He said, "Frank, don't," Diane whispered. On February 4th. Frank read, "There was a withdrawal of $8,000 for property maintenance, but there were no repairs done on the timber land that month. The money went to a Shell LLC, registered to Mark's brother in Florida. That is a consulting fee," Mark blurted out. On March 10th, Frank continued, ignoring him, $12,000 was withdrawn for legal retainers, but Hollis Pierce have no record of that payment. The check was cashed at a check cashing facility in Sculpted Gardens. Frank looked up, and then, last week, April 15th, a transfer of $25,000. The memo line says, Emergency Reserve. It went into a personal account under your name. Diane. Dad, please, Diane said, tears starting to stream down her face. It is not what it looks like. We were borrowing it. We were going to put it back. You were stealing, Frank said. His voice was devoid of pity. You have been bleeding the family trust dry for 2 years. You have taken over $200,000. I gasped. Ethan's hand tightened on my shoulder until it hurt. $200,000. That was the money meant to maintain the land. That was the legacy meant for the future. And that is why you didn't want the baby. Isn't it? Frank asked. He looked at Diane. You weren't afraid of changing diapers. You were afraid of the clause. What clause? Mark asked. Feigning ignorance. The great-grandchild clause, Frank said. The one that triggers an automatic audit and segregation of funds upon the birth of the first heir. If you took the baby, if you brought him into your home and signed the insurance papers and the medical forms, it would create an official record of his existence linked to your address. It would trigger the trust administrator to contact you about setting up his fund. Frank took a step closer to them. You knew that if the trust administrators started looking at the books to calculate Leo's share, they would see the holes. They would see the missing money. Diane put her face in her hands and began to sob. It wasn't the crying of a grandmother who missed her grandchild. It was the crying of a woman who had been caught. I watched them, and I felt physically sick. The nausea rolled over me in waves. You left me in the hospital, I whispered. You left me alone with broken ribs. You let me think I was unloved. You let me think I was a burden. And it was just because you didn't want a bank auditor to call your house Victoria. It is complicated, Mark insisted. Turning to me, we were in debt. The business deals, they went south. We were trying to fix it before you found out. We just needed time. So you loosened my brakes, I asked. I did not, Mark shouted. But you wanted an accident, Frank said. You wanted her incapacitated. That is why you filed for standby guardianship 3 weeks ago. Mark froze. You know about that, he whispered. I know everything, Frank said. You wanted control. If you were the legal guardians of Victoria and the baby, you would control the trust distributions. You could hide the theft. You could delay the audit. You could keep juggling the balls. Frank threw the papers onto the coffee table. They landed with a heavy slap. You were willing to risk your daughter's life and your grandson's safety to cover a jagged balance sheet. Diane looked up. Her mascara was running down her cheeks. We loved you. Victoria, she sobbed. We just didn't want you to know we were failures. We didn't want to lose the house. We didn't want to lose our standing in the church. So you sacrificed me instead, I said. Diane didn't answer. She just wept. Frank walked over to the fireplace and picked up a poker. He jabbed at a log, sending a shower of sparks up the chimney. I spoke to Alan Pierce this morning, Frank said. Mark flinched at the name of the attorney. I have executed an amendment to my will and to the Caldwell Creek Trust. Frank said, It is effective immediately. He turned to face them. You are out. What Mark asked. I have removed both of you as trustees, Frank said. I have removed you as beneficiaries. You will not receive another cent from the timberland. You will not receive this house when I die. You are cut off. Dad, you can't do that, Diane screamed. We are your children, and she is your daughter, Frank roared. The sound was so loud it made the baby stir in Clara's arms. He pointed a shaking finger at me. She called you from a trauma bed. She begged you for help, and you calculated the risk to your bank account and said no. He took a deep breath. Composing himself, You are removed, he said quietly. The sole beneficiary of the trust is now Victoria Garcia, with a subtrust for Leo Garcia. Ethan is named as the trustee. Mark stood up. We will sue. We will contest it. You are incompetent. We will drag this through probate for years. Frank smiled. It was a cold, terrifying smile. I was hoping you would say that. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. Because if you do, Frank said, I will hand this file the bank statements, the mechanic's report, and the text messages to the district attorney. Mark stopped. I am offering you a deal. Mark, Frank said, a private path. You walk away. You stop trying to control Victoria. You stop trying to get custody of this baby. You admit to Victoria right now that you prioritized your secrets over her safety. And if we do, Diane whispered, then I won't press criminal charges for the embezzlement. Frank said, I will let you keep your house. I will let you keep your reputation at your church. You can live your life, but you will do it away from us. And if we don't, Mark asked, then I call the police, Frank said, and I tell them to look at the brake line again, and I tell them to look at the bank accounts, and you will go to prison. The silence that followed was absolute. The fire popped. The baby made a soft cooing sound. Mark looked at Diane. Diane looked at Mark. They were doing the math. They were calculating the leverage. They realized they had none. Fine, Mark spat out. Fine what Frank asked? Fine. We accept. Mark said, we will walk away. Frank looked at Diane. Diane wiped her face. She looked at me. For a second, I thought I saw a glimmer of remorse, but then I saw her eyes flick to the folder on the table. Calculating the damage. I accept, she whispered. Frank nodded. He looked at me. Victoria, he said, this is your floor. I looked at my parents. They looked small. They looked pathetic. They didn't look like the giants who had controlled my life for 32 years. They looked like two people who had sold their souls for a country club membership. I shifted in the chair, the pain in my ribs serving as an anchor. I have conditions, I said. Diane looked at me, surprised I was speaking. What conditions, she asked. First, I said, you will never see Leo unsupervised. Ever. Not for an hour. Not for a minute. If you want to see him, it will be in a public place, with Ethan present, and only when invited. Diane opened her mouth to argue, but I cut her off. Second, I said, you will never present me with a piece of paper to sign again. If you hand me a birthday card, I will have a lawyer read it first. If you try to pressure me into any financial arrangement, I will call Frank, and he will call the police. I took a breath. And third, I said, you are going to leave now, and you are not going to text me. You are not going to post about this on Facebook. You are going to go home and sit in your empty house and think about the fact that you have a grandson who will grow up knowing his great-grandfather, but who will only know you as the people who didn't want him. Victoria, that is cruel. Diane whispered, no, Mom. I said, that is a boundary. I looked at Frank. Make them leave. Grandpa. Frank walked to the door and opened it. The gray afternoon light spilled in. Get out, Frank said. Mark stood up. He adjusted his collar. He tried to muster some dignity. You are making a mistake. Victoria, he said, family is everything. I looked at him. I looked at Ethan, who was holding my hand. I looked at Frank, who was holding the door. I looked at my son, sleeping safely in the corner. I know. I said, that is why I'm protecting mine from you. They walked out. They didn't look back. They walked to their car, got in, and drove away. Frank closed the door. He locked it. Then he slid the deadbolt. Then he engaged the security chain. He turned around and leaned his back against the wood, letting out a long, heavy sigh. He looked older suddenly. The adrenaline was fading. Are you okay? Ethan asked him. I hate them, Frank said softly. I hate that I raised a daughter who could do that. He looked at me. I am sorry. Victoria, I am so sorry. Don't be, I said. I felt tears running down my face, but they weren't tears of sadness anymore. They were tears of release. You saved us. Frank walked over to the table and gathered the papers. He threw the bank statements into the fire. We watched the edges curl and turn black, the evidence of their betrayal turning into ash. He kept the mechanic's report. He folded it carefully and put it in his pocket, just in case. He said, Clara, the doula, walked over with Leo. He's waking up, she said gently. I think he knows his mama is safe. She handed him to me. I took him. He was warm and solid. He smelled of milk and baby soap. I buried my nose in his neck. I felt his tiny heart beating against my chest. Ethan wrapped his arms around both of us. Frank sat on the coffee table, his hand resting on my knee. We sat there for a long time, just breathing. The house was quiet. The threat was gone. I looked at the window. The rain had stopped. What now? Ethan asked. Now, I said, looking at my son. We go home. And we change the locks. It had been 10 days since the confrontation at Frank's house. 10 days of silence. 10 days of sleeping in my own bed. Of learning the rhythm of Leo's breathing. Of Ethan bringing me ice packs for my ribs and coffee for my soul. The cast on my leg was a heavy, itching nuisance, but the bruising on my chest was fading to a sickly yellow, a sign that the body remembers how to heal even when the heart does not. We had changed the locks. We had installed a doorbell camera. We had done the things people do when they are afraid of burglars. Only we were afraid of grandparents. It was a Tuesday afternoon. The sky was that bright, hard blue that comes after a long storm. Ethan was in the kitchen, washing bottles. The rhythmic swish-clink of the brush against glass was the only sound in the house. I was on the sofa, folding a pile of onesies that smelled like lavender detergent. Then, the doorbell rang. I froze. My hand clutched a tiny blue bodysuit so hard, my knuckles turned white. I looked at the monitor on the coffee table. It was them. Diane and Mark were standing on my front porch. They were not empty-handed. Mark was holding a massive, oversized teddy bear, the kind you win at a state fair or buy in a panic at a toy store. Diane was holding a basket wrapped in cellophane, filled with what looked like expensive lotions and soaps. They looked normal. They looked like excited grandparents coming to visit. If you didn't know they had left me to rot in a trauma ward, you would think they were the picture of suburban love. Ethan walked into the living room, drying his hands on a towel. He looked at the monitor, and his jaw set hard. "Do not answer it," he said. I looked at the screen. Diane was smoothing her skirt. She looked anxious, checking her reflection in the glass of the storm door. Mark shifted his weight, looking over his shoulder at the street, as if checking for witnesses. "I have to," I said. Why, Ethan asked. "We told them to stay away. Because if I don't," I said, slowly pulling myself up to a standing position, grabbing my crutches. "I will always wonder if they came to scream or if they came to surrender, and I need to know." I hobbled to the door. Ethan stood right behind me, his presence a warm, solid wall. I unlocked the deadbolt. I opened the door. My parents smiled. It was a reflex, instantaneous and bright. "The same way a dog wags its tail when it sees a treat," Victoria Diane said. Her voice pitched high and breathless. "We were just in the neighborhood. We saw the car was in the driveway." She thrust the basket toward me. "I brought you some things for self-care," she said. "Lavender and chamomile. Good for stress. And Mark found this bear, for the nursery." I didn't move to take the gifts. I leaned on my crutches, blocking the entrance. I didn't smile back. We had an agreement. I said. My voice was steady, surprising me. "You were supposed to leave us alone." "Oh, honey," Mark said, chuckling nervously. He tried to step forward, but Ethan stepped into the gap. His arms crossed. Mark stopped. "We just wanted to clear the air," Mark said, talking to Ethan's chest. "We have had some time to think. We realized things got heated at Dad's house. We wanted to come by and show you that we are ready to move past it." "Move past it?" I asked. "Yes," Diane said eagerly. "We understand now. We understand that you felt unsupported. We are ready to start over. We want to be the grandparents Leo deserves. Can we come in? Just for a minute? We haven't even seen him awake." I looked at her face. I looked for the shame. I looked for the guilt. I looked for any sign that she understood she had almost cost me my life and my child. I saw nothing. I saw the same woman who had told me to use state services. I saw the same woman who had texted the church group that I was unstable. She wasn't sorry she had done it. She was sorry the strategy hadn't worked. She was rebooting the computer, trying to load the Nice Mom program because the Scary Mom program had crashed. And yet, the reflex was there. It was a physical pull in my gut, a lifetime of training. Be polite, don't make a scene, take the gift, say thank you, let them in. It was the deep, primal urge to smooth things over, to return to the status quo, to believe that this time would be different. My hand twitched toward the door handle, an instinct to open it wider. Then I heard Leo cry from the back room, just a short, sleepy squawk. The sound snapped the reflex like a dry twig. "No," I said. Diane blinked. "What? You cannot come in." I said, "Victoria, be reasonable," Mark said, his voice dropping an octave, gaining that familiar edge of authority. "We are holding olive branches here. We are your parents. You cannot keep us out of your house forever. It is petty." "I'm not being petty." "Dad," I said, "I am being safe. Safe from what Diane asked, looking affronted. We are family." "Safe from you," I said. Before they could respond, a heavy diesel engine roared to life behind them. A truck had pulled up to the curb, not parked, just idling. Frank got out. He didn't run. He walked with a slow, deliberate gait, his boots crunching on the gravel of the driveway. He wasn't carrying a weapon, but the way he walked suggested he didn't need one. He walked right up the steps and stood next to me on the porch. He didn't look at me. He looked at Mark. I thought I made myself clear. Frank said, "Dad." Diane groaned. "Stop following us. We are just visiting our daughter. We are trying to heal this family. You are trying to secure your perimeter," Frank said. He reached into his back pocket and pulled out a folded letter. He didn't hand it to them. He held it up. "I got a call this morning," Frank said. "From the bank and from the trust administrator." Mark went still. The teddy bear in his arms lowered slightly, its glass eyes staring blankly at the sky. "It turns out," Frank said, his voice conversational but deadly, "that the $200,000 you took wasn't just borrowed from the general fund, it was taken from the timber escrow account." So Mark said, sweat beading on his upper lip, "Money is money. It all goes to the same pot." "No, Mark," Frank said, "it doesn't. The escrow account is federally regulated because of the conservation grants we get from the government." He let that sink in. "You didn't just steal from me," Frank said. "You stole federal grant money, and the bank flagged it. They called me because, as the primary trustee, I have to authorize the explanation. If I don't, they are required by law to file a suspicious activity report with the IRS and the FBI within 48 hours. Diane dropped the gift basket. I heard the sound of glass breaking inside the cellophane. The smell of lavender exploded into the air. Sickeningly sweet. "Oh my God," she whispered. Frank looked at me. "Victoria," he said, "I didn't come here to rescue you. You are doing a fine job of that yourself. I came here to tell you what this means." "What does it mean?" I asked. "It means if they don't pay that money back within 48 hours, there is going to be an investigation," Frank said. "A real one. And if you are connected to them, if they have guardianship, if they are on your accounts, if they are co-signers on anything you get dragged in, your credit, your background checks, your reputation." He turned back to Mark. "They are radioactive. Victoria, they aren't just bad parents. They are a liability." I looked at Mark. He was gray. He wasn't looking at me anymore. He was looking at the ground, calculating. "Is that true?" I asked Mark. "Did you steal federal money?" "It was a misunderstanding," Mark shouted, his composure shattering. "It was a bridge loan. We were going to pay it back when the new development deal closed, but the deal didn't close, did it?" Ethan asked. His voice was quiet. "That is why you needed the trust." Mark didn't answer. I felt a cold clarity wash over me. It wasn't just about control. It wasn't just about narcissism. It was about survival. They were drowning, and they had tried to use my son as a life raft. Why, I asked Diane. She looked up. Her eyes were red, rimmed with panic. "Why did you refuse to help me?" I asked. "I need to know." And don't give me the boundary speech. Tell me the truth. Diane looked at Frank. She looked at the letter in his hand. She looked at the broken basket of soap at her feet. She realized the game was over. The polite veneer was gone. Because I knew you, she whispered. What I knew you. Victoria, she said, her voice shaking. You are soft. You have always been soft. You call me 3 times a week. You ask for my opinion on paint colors. I knew that if you were desperate enough, if you were really, truly stuck, you would come home. I stared at her. You wanted me to come home. I thought if we said no. Diane said, tears spilling over, that Ethan wouldn't be able to get back in time. I thought you would have to discharge the baby to us because you had no other choice. I thought you would move back into the guest room to recover. And then I asked, and then we would be a family again. She said, under my roof, where I could make sure everything was handled. Handled. I repeated, you mean controlled. I mean safe, she cried. I wanted you safe. And yes, I wanted the trust money to stay in the family so we didn't lose everything. Is that so wrong to want to save your parents? I looked at her. I really looked at her. You didn't want to save me. Mom, I said, you wanted to possess me. You wanted me broken so you could be the one to fix me. You were willing to let my son go to a foster home for a night just to prove that I couldn't survive without you. I took a step back, leaning heavily on the crutch. That isn't love, I said. That is a hostage situation. Ethan stepped forward then. He moved past me, out onto the porch. He stood toe-to-toe with Mark. Mark was 3 inches taller. But in that moment, Ethan looked like a giant. You know, Ethan said, his voice conversational. I thought about hitting you. Mark blinked, stepping back. Excuse me. In the hospital hallway, Ethan said. When you told me my son was an asset complication, I thought about breaking your jaw. I really did. Ethan, Mark stammered, but I didn't. Ethan said, do you know why? Mark shook his head? Because that is what you would do. Ethan said, you react, you explode, you manipulate. And I didn't want Victoria to see any more violence. I wanted her to see that a man can protect his family without destroying the world around him. I wanted her to feel safe. Ethan leaned in close. You are never going to make her feel unsafe again. He turned and walked back to me. He put his arm around my waist. Victoria, he said, tell them. I looked at my parents. They stood amidst the wreckage of their own making, the broken glass, the stolen money, the lies exposed in the harsh sunlight. I took a deep breath. The air tasted of lavender and exhaust fumes. Here is what is going to happen, I said. They looked at me. For the first time, they weren't looking at their daughter. They were looking at a mother. You are going to leave, I said. You are going to take the bear. You are going to take the basket. And you are going to go fix your mess with the bank. I don't care how you do it. Sell the house. Sell the cars. But you fix it. We will. Mark said quickly, we can liquidate the... I don't care, I interrupted. I don't want to know. And as for us, I continued, there will be no visits. Not today, not next week. Victoria, please, Diane wept. You refused my son. I said, you chose your pride over his safety. You don't get to hold him just because you bought a teddy bear. So it is over. Mark asked, you are cutting us off. I'm protecting my peace. I said, maybe, in a year. If you have gone to counseling, real counseling, not just talking to your pastor, and if you have paid back every cent you stole, and if Frank says you are safe, maybe then we can meet for coffee. Without the baby. A year, Diane gasped. He won't even know us exactly. I said, he won't know you as the people who abandoned him. He won't know you at all. That is the mercy I am giving you. I am letting you be strangers instead of villains. Mark looked at Frank. You are letting her do this, Mark asked. I am not letting her do anything. Frank said, she is a grown woman. She is doing it herself. Mark looked back at me. His face hardened. The desperation turned into something ugly, the resentment of a man who realizes he has lost his power. "You are making a mistake, Victoria." He said, "You are going to need us one day. Ethan will leave, or you will lose your job, or something will happen, and you will be alone." I looked at Ethan. I looked at Frank. I thought about the social worker, Mrs. Higgins. I thought about the nurses. I thought about the mechanic. I am not alone. I said, "I just have a different family now. One that shows up." Mark sneered. "And what are you going to do about the legal side? Are you going to press charges? Are you going to expose us to the whole town?" He was daring me. He wanted a fight. He wanted to be the victim of a vindictive daughter so he could spin the story to his friends. I looked at him, and I felt a wave of exhaustion. I could burn them down. I could post the mechanic's report on Facebook. I could call the police about the brake line. I could testify against them for the fraud. I could spend the next 5 years in courtrooms and depositions, fighting them in the mud. But then I would be in the mud with them, and I had a baby to raise. "I am not going to press charges," I said. Diane let out a sob of relief. "But not for you," I added. "I am doing it for Leo. I don't want his first memories to be of police cars in the driveway. I don't want his college fund drained by legal fees." I pointed to the street. "I am going to let you go. You are going to walk away, and you are going to be quiet. You are going to disappear from our lives. If I hear a whisper of a rumor that I am unstable, or if I see one legal filing, or if you come near my driveway again, then I hand everything to the district attorney." I looked at Frank. "Does that work for you?" Grandpa Frank nodded. He looked proud. "It works for me." I looked back at my parents. "Go," I said. Mark stood there for a second longer, his ego wrestling with his survival instinct. Survival won. He bent down, picked up the teddy bear, and grabbed Diane's arm. "Come on, Diane," he muttered. "We are leaving." Diane looked at me one last time. Her face was a mask of tragedy. "I just wanted us to be close," she whispered. "I know, Mom," I said softly. "But you held on too tight." They turned and walked down the steps. They walked past Frank, who didn't move an inch. They got into their pristine sedan. They backed out of the driveway. Avoiding the broken glass of the gift basket, they drove away. I watched the car disappear around the corner. Frank walked up the steps. He looked at the mess on the porch. "I will clean that up," he said. "You go inside." I looked at him. "You are staying for dinner, right?" I asked. Frank smiled. His eyes crinkled at the corners. "I wouldn't miss it. I promised Leo I would read him the stock market report. It puts him right to sleep." I laughed. It hurt my ribs, but it felt good. I turned to Ethan. He was still watching the street, his body tense. "They are gone," I said. He looked at me. The tension left his shoulders. He reached out and touched my cheek. "You were incredible," he said. I was terrified. I admitted, "I know," he said. "That is why it was incredible." We walked back inside. The house was quiet. The smell of lavender was still there, but underneath it, I could smell the roast chicken Ethan had in the oven, and the wood smoke from Frank's jacket. I walked to the back room. Leo was awake. He was lying in his crib, staring up at the mobile of gray elephants. He saw me and kicked his legs, his face breaking into a gummy, milk-drunk smile. I picked him up. I held him close, burying my face in his soft hair. I thought about the brake line. I thought about the hospital bed. I thought about the empty silence of my phone when I had begged for help. And then I thought about Frank's truck idling outside. I thought about Ethan washing bottles. I thought about the boundaries I had just built, brick by brick, to keep this little life safe. My father had asked me what I was going to do. I walked to the window and looked out at the garden. The sun was setting, casting long golden shadows across the grass. I wasn't going to spend my life seeking revenge. I wasn't going to spend it chasing an apology that would never come. I was going to be happy, and that, I realized as I kissed my son's nose, was the greatest revenge of all. I was going to be happy without them. Thank you so much for reading My Parents Refused My Newborn during my car accident. What Grandpa told them changed everything. This story was a journey through betrayal, gaslighting, and the ultimate reclamation of power. It explores how sometimes the people who are supposed to protect us are the ones we need protection from, and how family isn't always defined by blood, but by who shows up when the brakes fail. I would love to know where you are listening from today. Are you tuning in from the busy streets of New York, the quiet countryside of England, or somewhere in between? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story and want more tales of justice, family drama, and emotional resilience, please make sure to subscribe to Revenge Stories. And finally, I want to hear your thoughts. Did Victoria make the right choice by not pressing charges? Would you have let the parents back in? Share your perspective in the comments. Until next time, protect your peace.